So hello and welcome to everybody, and thank you very much for joining us. I am Karen Romano, the current president of the Book Industry Guild of New York. We have a short meeting tonight, so I'm going to keep my remarks very brief. Historically, we use our August meeting to hold a softball game to benefit the Literacy Assistance Center, which provides advocacy and resources that are dedicated to adult literacy. In other years, we would have been in Central Park with peanuts and Cracker Jacks and possibly a beer in hand. And although we can't get together today and run bases, we are very excited to have our panelists here to talk about this wonderful organization and our longstanding relationship with them. Our moderator, Brigid Black, is the vice president of BIGNY. She is a production manager at Simon & Schuster and a veteran of their softball team, the Rumblers. Prior to SNS, she worked at Hachette Book Group, Sterling Publishing, and Penguin. Brigid is also the former chair of the Young to Publishing Group, YPG, and has been recognized by Publishers Weekly as a Star Watch honoree. She has spoken to students at NYU and her alma mater, Villanova University, about careers in publishing. And with that, I'm going to hand it over to Brigid to throw out the first pitch. So. Sorry, I couldn't resist.
Excellent, well done.
And the baseball puns have begun. I love it.
Yes.
Karen, thank you so much for the kind words. Just like you said, we have about an hour's worth of time. So I'm going to introduce the two panelists and get right into the program. First up is Paul. Paul Stanley is the president and founder of both the Angel Conservation Corporation and Fundación Étnica, working with the Pemón of Canaima National Park, Venezuela. When he lived in New York, he worked within the printing industry for the Courier Corporation for some 26 years. Paul served on the board of the Literacy Assistance Center and founded the campaign with the Book Industry Guild of New York, then called the Bookbinders Guild of New York, to raise funds for literacy. It was simply called Promote Literacy. He now has an ecotourism business in Venezuela, Angel Eco Tours. Paul is now writing a book entitled Venezuela's Lost World, Discovery, Conservation, and Cooperation in Camarata Valley, and he is actively looking for a publisher. Whew, sounds good.
Yeah,
next.
Thank you.
Not too shabby.
No, I like it.
Next up is Ira. Ira Yankwitt is the executive director of the Literacy Assistance Center, a 37-year-old not-for-profit organization dedicated to strengthening and expanding the adult education system and to advancing adult literacy as a core value in society and a foundation for equal opportunity and social justice. Ira is a longtime adult literacy advocate. Prior to becoming the ED of the LAC, Ira was the executive director of program initiatives for the NYC Department of Education's Office of Adult and Continuing Education, for a program that served over 30,000 adult students annually. He plays a lead role in the New York City Coalition for Adult Literacy and was the chair of the NYC Grassroots Literacy Coalition. He holds a master's in education from the Harvard Graduate School of Education and a BA from Oberlin College. Whew. So we've got two wonderful panelists here tonight. First up, I'm going to address a set of questions for you, Paul, and then we're going to shift over to Ira's sphere, and then we'll open it up for the Q&A at the end.
Okay.
Sounds good?
Sounds good to me.
Okay. The first question. So Paul, we understand that you were responsible for starting the relationship with the Book Industry Guild of New York and the LAC back in 1992. And since that time, BIGNY has donated roughly $400,000 to LAC, thanks to that introduction. So can you please tell us a little bit about how that initial connection was made?
Yeah, well, yeah, I think it's tough to think about it such a long time ago. But what happened, I came over from England, started working the publishing industry, well, the printing side in New York. And a lady called Sally McCravey and Janet McCarthy Grimm both coerced me to join the Bookbinders Guild of New York at the time, right? And so I did, and within a very short time, I'd already raised a little bit of money in England. I thought, well, why doesn't the Guild get involved in using some of the excess funds to do something with it? So we came up with a theme of literacy. And so the funny thing was, I went after that notion, asking people everywhere. I even sent a letter to Barbara Bush, and I got a copy of a book with a dog's paw print on it to say, good luck with your literacy program. And that was,
Wow.
I still got the book. Anyway, but at the same time, somehow or other, I got in touch with this 1-800 number, which I called, and it turned out to be a junkyard in Nebraska. And would you believe it? I talked to a lady there for forever and telling her what a great organization we were and everything. And finally, she put me in touch with the Literacy Assistance Center. And that's basically how it started. So from there, we went on to build the fun things.
Wow, a junkyard in Nebraska. That is
it's true.
Very unique.
Yes, very much so. Very much so. So that's how that started. And I don't know whether you want to ask more questions or whether you want me to carry on.
Well, it kind of leads pretty neatly into the next question, which is, how did the idea of the annual charity softball game get linked to this Promote Literacy campaign that started during your time as the Guild president?
Exactly. Well, I used to spend a few hours or a few. Well, listen, I can say it now because I'm not working in the publishing industry anymore. But one of my local customers to my office, John Wiley and Sons, I used to dine occasionally in this a place called El Rio Grande, and I'd sit at the bar and we'd have a couple of cocktails or soft drinks, not really soft drinks, but I would. Anyway, whilst there, some guys came in from the radio station. It was then called WNEW-FM. And I got kind of friendly with them. They were DJs, they were production guys, etc., etc. And somewhere or other, I wiggled away into asking them if they wanted to. I made them play the Bookbinders Guild at softball, because they had a charity softball thing happen every year. And I made them do it, and they weren't very happy. So a couple of the guys that organized things, but my buddies all said, no, let's do it. And that's how it started. So we started playing softball against the WNEW radio station in Central Park. So with that came all sorts of publicity, and it was really cool. It was a great start. And then after a while, obviously NEW didn't stay as NEW anymore, and they moved on, and we started playing matches, printers versus publishers, and so over the years we put together a program, raised money, and it went very, very well for quite a number of years. So cool. Yeah, that's where that came from.
Wow. Yeah, I actually took part in the softball game last year for the first time, and I had a blast. Yeah, definitely a wonderful tradition there. So the next question, so in addition to the annual softball game, I think this is more of a fun question. Could you tell us about some of the Daredevil events that we've heard of, referred to over the years?
Yeah, yeah, exactly.
Go ahead.
That was fun. Listen, I was single in New York, and there were a lot of single people in publishing, and you know, it was a nice camaraderie everybody had, no? And then do you remember bungee jumping started? It had happened in New York City. Probably not many people will. But
personally, I have not, but I know it's popular among some folks. So
they put a crane over the Hudson River, and again in the same bar that hatched the charity softball game. We were talking about, they've just put a crane over the Hudson River and people doing bungee jumping. So within about an hour, I had 9 people signed up to do a charity bungee jump. And we had an absolute blast. I mean, scary as hell. I can't show you the photographs. I just found them the other day, but unbelievable. I could send them to you afterwards if you've got any way of sharing with people.
Sure, we
But,
might want to share on our Instagram page as a throwback of sorts.
No, I've got those. And so
Yeah.
so we did a bungee jump. There were 9 people did a bungee jump, and we raised, I think, from that about $8,000 or $9,000.
Impressive.
This is great.
Yeah.
And so then we followed on with taking 26 people, I believe, up to, oh Jesus, I can't remember the name of the place, where they do parachute jumping, sky jumping in upstate Garden, somewhere, Garden City, New York, or something like that. Anyway, we went upstate, and we took 26 people in a bus from the industry, and everybody raised money.
Dave Dickey has chimed in and says Gardner, New York. Gardner? I don't know if that's the correct. Okay.
Gardner, New York. I think so. It's very good.
Yeah.
Thanks, Dave. Thanks, Santa. If anybody saw his photograph, you'd understand what I'm talking about. But that was another one. That was 26 people, and then we followed on with a whitewater rafting trip down to West Virginia, choosing the most difficult rapids you can almost choose. And
okay,
again,
that I have done. I have gone whitewater rafting, so I would have been on board for that.
Oh, that was super. Or off board, as the case was in many corners there. And then we followed that with the luge and the bobsled up in Lake Placid. And again, we had a busload of people coming out of New York. And again, we raised quite a lot of money. And those years were fun. And it only came to an end because we couldn't think of anything more dangerous to do.
Wow.
Yeah.
I have to ask you, luging and bobsledding, how do you do that for beginners? Is there a 101 course? How does that work?
That's a good question.
You don't remember?
Well, first of all, the luge, you're going down the slope, if you like, or the curves and everything, looking down, and so you're looking down at your feet and then trying to control your feet like this, so you go up or down on the curves and stuff to keep moving. Quite scary because you can really get going. But the bobsled, they only let us do about half the course, and I do remember that because they had a competition there just before us, and somebody crashed their bobsled, and somebody was rushed off to hospital just as they were walking up to the start point. So off we went.
I mean, all in the name of literacy. It sounds like you could have possibly been bronze medalists, but I'm very impressed to hear these are definitely Daredevil events.
No, it was a lot of fun, and a lot of young people in publishing. I think we all had a blast, and people would pay to see the back of you. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Oh, he won't come around again. Let's give him some money. Yeah, and off you go. So yeah, we did very well over the years. For that.
Wow, it's cool to hear that part of the history. I didn't know about it before, so it's kind of a blast hearing about it now. So my last question for you at the moment is, what was the most recent annual BIGNY charity softball game you attended?
Right, I think it's around about 2013. I was looking at my 65,000 odd photographs that I've got in my laptop, and and it was 2013, I believe. Carol Bystra would know better because she and Steve were there. So I think it was 2013, last time I got up to New York.
So about 7 years ago. Do you remember the final score? Do you remember the temperature? Anything that stuck out to you about that day?
No, I remember we had trouble getting a field, and we had to go in a field way up by Harlem somewhere. It wasn't quite the same. It was a little difficult, and getting the umpires there. The umpires didn't turn up. I can remember all that happening.
Uh-oh.
It was a fine day, and everybody that turned up had fun, but they made me play, even though I was getting on in my years. But other than that, no, it was fun. Yeah.
Cool. Well, I'm actually wearing one of the famous shirts from the game, so I feel the need to show everybody the pitching in for literacy.
I was wondering. Very well done.
All part of the theme.
Excellent. Well done. I love it.
Thank you. And thank you so much for your insight into sort of the history of the connection between the two groups. So for now, I'm going to shift my attention to Ira. Oh, Dave has just chimed in that it was 103 degrees when you showed up unannounced to the 24th annual game. So that is crazy hot. Wow.
Thanks,
Well,
Dave. That was hot.
yeah, that's nuts. I think last year was actually a beautiful day, like an oddly clear, not too, and that's kind of a miracle in New York City. So it was really wonderful.
Well, I think in 26 years there was only one time we had to cancel the actual events through bad weather.
Right.
The very first event was almost cancelled because it rained all night long, and I remember staying up to like 4 o'clock in the morning, almost crying, thinking the game against WNEW would never happen. But they couldn't believe it. The sun just came out the next day, and we had a blast. So
wow, it was meant to be. Yeah, that's not a bad track record. Unfortunately, we're not playing this year, but hopefully we can return to playing next year. We're going to move to Ira now. So Ira, how did your taking over as the executive director of the LAC fit in terms of the timeline that Paul just described?
Yeah, so first off, let me just begin by thanking you all for having me here, and really just, it's hard for me to express fully just the level of gratitude and the deep feeling of connection that we at the LAC have with the Book Industry Guild. You know, you mentioned whether it was $400,000 raised or $600,000 raised over, 30-ish years. You know, certainly $15,000 to $20,000 a year on average is no small amount for an organization like ours. But I think even more than that, and Brigid, I'll tell you, this even came through in the questions that I saw you prepare for our conversation tonight. The way in which you all relate to and understand this issue, an issue which, for any number of reasons does not get a lot of attention in the public. Even though there are 2.2 million adults in New York City who lack English language proficiency, a high school diploma, or both. That's 1 in 3 adults, many of whom are the essential workers that we've been relying on to survive, these last few months. We can talk about that in a little bit. But even with that, even in a moment when our country is, grappling, profoundly with issues of racial and economic justice, those 2.2 million adults don't get a lot of attention. This issue of adult literacy doesn't get a lot of attention. And the fact that the Book Industry Guild has got this, has thought about it, and has been this committed to it over the years, and has stuck with the LAC in some difficult times, I think just says so much about you all, and we are profoundly grateful. I will say, I'm going to answer the question about, how my timeline is as ED of the LAC, which actually began in January of 2013, aligns with some of what Paul said. But just going back a little bit, Paul mentions that his relationship began in 1992. My first job in adult literacy began in 1993 at a small community-based organization. And one of the things that Paul didn't mention is for many of the years that the Book Industry Guild was raising money, most of that money went to an annual event where we did, it was often called the Oscars for adult literacy, where the LAC got nominations from people working in the field and selected 5, 6 winners of an annual recognition award. And that recognition award was funded by the Guild. It enabled us to really provide a beautiful award plaque or picture for folks. We had a beautiful award ceremony. And, I remember the days back in the 90s, and this has certainly changed as funding has increased and as the field has become more institutionalized and professionalized. But at that time, most people who were working in the field of adult literacy as adult basic literacy teachers, ESOL teachers, English teachers, high school equivalency teachers, these were low paid jobs, part-time jobs, very few benefits, very little recognition. And this ceremony meant so much to people. And these awards meant so much to people. And I happen to know because I got my award in 1998. And I think that kind of recognition that I got at that point, 5 years into my career, is exactly why I'm here in 2020, because I really felt part of something bigger than myself. And what the Book Industry Guild was able to provide is what enabled me to feel that way. Also at the time, most programs had small, modest libraries, either classroom-based libraries, or if you were lucky enough, you had a little room somewhere in an organization that you could put books. And along with the award to the person came a $500 gift for buying books. And again, in a small program like the one I was in up in East Harlem, this was huge to be able to buy and also $500 went further in 1998 than it does today. So the commitment that the Book Industry Guild has made to the LEC, to this issue, and to really helping sustain and grow and dignify the work of teaching basic literacy, of teaching English to immigrants, of teaching high school fluency, it can't be overstated. So I just really want to express my gratitude to all of you. I could stop there, or after 10 minutes of talking, I can go and actually answer the question that you asked, which is that it's been it's
Go ahead.
what I will say is that the demographics of who comes to these programs has changed since the 90s. When I started, about half of the students coming were immigrants, and they were coming for English language classes, but over half were people who were born and raised in New York City or in the other states in the United States, who were denied a quality education because they were Black, because they were Latino, because they were poor. And so at the time, many of us who were coming to the field saw this as a fundamental social and economic justice issue. I'm seeing that I'm being asked if I could sit back from my computer. I gladly sit back. I know nobody wants to see my nose. I know sometimes when I sit back, people can't hear me, so believe it or not. So if that happens because of my technology, just somebody wave or something and I'll move forward.
Fair enough.
Okay, great. So back in the 90s, we were working more with people from the United States who were denied a quality education, who were coming with very limited reading skills or hadn't graduated from high school. We saw this very much as a racial, social, and economic justice and equity issue, and we still do. Over time, as schools have gotten marginally stronger, as educational equity has become a broader issue, and there's been a broader commitment, and as a greater number of immigrants have come to New York City, we've seen that more and more our work is either focused on English language learning for immigrants, or immigrants who learn English did not graduate from high school in their home countries and are moving into high school equivalency classes. So the demographics of the field have shifted, and the funding has shifted, right? When I started in the 90s, the funding understood that people were coming to these classes for a variety of reasons. Some of them just wanted to be able to read the Bible in church. Some of them just wanted to be able to read to their children. Some of them just wanted to be able to better participate in the political process. Some of them just wanted to be able to navigate systems in New York City better. And yes, many of them were coming because they wanted to get a job or get a better job. Starting around 2000, the public funding for adult literacy increased, which was a good thing, but the purpose of the funding decreased, and a lot of the focus just became on workforce outcomes. So it's been a real struggle over the years, really going back to that time, to be able to serve the full range of people who come to our programs for the range of goals that they come for. And I think when I think back of why was the Book Industry Guild interested in adult literacy, I'm sure absolutely the idea that you were supporting opportunities for people to learn skills to get jobs was something that was important to you. But you're the Book Industry Guild. I'd also imagine it was because you believed that there was something profoundly human and dignified about being able to read. And there was something enriching about being able to read and self-actualizing about being able to read. And that was good enough for you. And at the time, there was more recognition on that on the part of public and private funders than there is now. So I think, part of it's hard to say exactly what's changed from 2013 to today, aside from the fact that I became the executive director of the Literacy Assistance Center. What I would say is that I think what maybe to me is a little more relevant is how who the field of adult literacy is serving has changed from the time the Book Industry Guild started to support us, and how the funding and the purpose of the funding have changed since we've started. And you could tell that from my tone, that this is an issue for me, that we are not being funded to serve people for all the reasons and goals that they are choosing to come to literacy programs.
Mm-hmm.
And, part of this, I know you're going to ask me some questions about our Literacy and Justice Initiative, is very much about that and returning to that kind of broader focus and purpose. So let me stop.
Wow, that was wonderful information, and I do want to keep the ball rolling in the interest of time. But relatedly, I think you did cover some of this. Can you just give us a quick synopsis of the LAC's mission statement?
Yeah. So our mission and I think apologies if I think you read it, Brigid, earlier, and you read it much and said it much more eloquently than I'm going to. So thank you for that, and apologies for not being as eloquent. But our mission is to strengthen and expand the adult education system and to advance adult literacy as a core value in society and a foundation for equal opportunity and social justice. And what I would say is that what we have done really, really well since our founding in 1983, and I think what Paul and others who have been around for a while know us for, is the strengthening part. Most of our work is funded by city and state dollars to provide training and technical assistance and coaching and curriculum development work with publicly funded adult literacy providers, particularly those who work in small community-based organizations throughout the city. So what we're known for in our field, what we're known for outside of it, is that strengthening part, right? In terms of the expanding part, you mentioned earlier, we are part of, and at different times in our history, including now, have played a real leadership role in advocacy organizations that are fighting for increased funding for adult literacy education. In terms of advancing adult literacy as a core value in society and as a foundation for equal opportunity and social justice, I have to say in all honesty, and maybe this was not the case prior to when I got there, but you asked about, what's different from 2013 to now. I would say that piece, when I came on, really felt aspirational. It felt like it's what we want to be doing, but are we really, really doing it? So we went through a strategic planning process a couple of years ago where we've said, yes, we need to always be trying to provide really, really high quality professional development, technical assistance, training for adult literacy providers, but we really need to invest our organizational resources in advancing adult literacy as a core value and a foundation for social justice. I mentioned earlier 2.2 million adults in New York City who lack English language proficiency, high school diploma, 1 in 3. Public funding right now allows for 3% of those to participate in classes. So 3 for every 100, just under 70,000 a year of those 2.2 million. So even to the extent that I'm very proud of the impact my organization has, if you think about what it means to only be working with a subset of teachers who work with a subset of those 3%, right? Our impact is limited. What we decided 4 years ago is we really need to focus on the advocacy piece too. And we also need to be focusing on advocacy, not in the traditional way of the state gives you $7 million a year, let's see if we can get it to 10, right? Or 14. But to really go back to re-envisioning what adult literacy can be, what the range of purposes it can serve, how the same people who are in adult literacy classes are also on the front lines and the forefront for other issues around racial, social, and economic justice, and how programs can tie their educational work to those broader movements, right? And we need to fight for funding for that. And the reality is, and I don't need to tell anyone on this call, we are at an extraordinary time where, on the one hand, we're seeing the rise of authoritarianism, white supremacy, and even in, to some neo-fascism. And at the same time, we're seeing movements and people getting elected who really are coming with an explicit racial and social and economic justice agenda. And, we're choosing to align ourselves there and to identify political leaders, elected officials who really get this issue and who could really champion a much, much more substantial investment in adult literacy education. And that's really the big focus of my work right now and a big focus of our work since I've been there in 2013.
Wow. Absolutely. You brought up extraordinary times, which leads into the next question. We've been living in a pandemic since March. How has COVID-19 affected your literacy programs and students? And you had shared with me the results of a survey that had recently been done addressing this.
Yeah. So, you know, if you think about, well, who are the 2.2 million people who lack English language proficiency or a high school diploma in New York City? There are frontline workers. They're the people who work in the grocery stores, the delivery workers, the home care aides, the people who are doing maintenance in the hospital, right? And so those are our students. And so, you know, so back in May, we did a survey of programs. We recently put out a report. Brigid, you know, I can share the link if you want to share it with folks. They could take a look at either the summary or the report as a whole. But I think probably you all could guess, thinking about who our students are and who the 2.2 million people are, how COVID-19 has affected them. Job and income loss, challenges with homeschooling, health issues as essential workers, lack of access to quality health care for themselves and their families, and to the extent that they have been in adult literacy classes. And I will say, our field, similar to K-12, did a remarkable job almost overnight in moving classes online. And so a lot of what you've heard about both the success and the challenges of the move to online learning in K-12, there's a direct parallel in adult literacy education. And, you know, I'm very proud that we happen to have on our staff at the LAC people who are real experts in instructional technology and remote learning. So, you know, we have been very busy these last couple of months, increasing our workshops, our trainings, our coaching. And I think, you know, I'm very, very proud of my staff. I've done none of this, so I take no credit, but, you know, I'm really been quite moved to see what my staff has done and the way they've stepped up to help. But the problem there, as we know from K-12 as well, is that over half the adults who are in face-to-face classes either didn't have the hardware or didn't have reliable internet access to be able to get online to do the classes. So you're talking about people who are, you know, in those frontline jobs, struggling with their own health, struggling with their own income, struggling with families, struggling with working with their kids, and now struggling with their own schooling. At the same time, I will say that for the 50% or so of students who weren't able to get online, in some cases there were real benefits, because those same people that we're talking about often have issues with childcare, which makes it hard to get to class.
Right.
Issues with car fare, you know, subway fare to help them get to class. Issues with physical mobility, unorthodox, unconventional job schedules. So we've actually seen, for those who have been able to get online, there's a subset of those, particularly those who are coming in at a higher level of English or literacy, high school equivalency students, who have really benefited from the online learning. So we see some real value unexpectedly going forward with this that I don't think we would have anticipated. But, you know, as a whole, those who are in need of literacy services and those who are obtaining literacy services really are among the most vulnerable, and they are enduring what, you know, you are reading about and thinking about and seeing among the most vulnerable.
That's really telling, especially the technology component. And it's interesting to hear about some of the pros and the cons of being remote during this time. So thank you for shedding light on that. The next question is, you know, well, we at the Guild were very impressed with what you wrote about the LIC's Literacy and Justice Initiative on the website. So for those who might not be familiar with it, and again, I think you touched upon this a little bit before, can you tell us a little bit about the Literacy and Justice Initiative and the LIC's commitment to social justice?
Sure. So, you know, maybe by way of a story. So, you know, Paul started in 92, I started in 93. You know, in the early to mid 90s, a large percentage of students in adult literacy programs at the time were women on public assistance. And this was during the time of Giuliani in New York City, Pataki in New York State, and Bill Clinton in the White House, all of whom were very committed to what was referred to as welfare reform. And a big piece of welfare reform was a tough love approach that said what these people really need is to have a better work ethic. And there was a lot of racism and a lot of sexism and a lot of classism embedded in that, but that was the rhetoric. And so what they started to do was take women on public assistance who were in basic literacy classes or high school literacy classes and pull them out to do what was called workfare. And this was basically, you know, cleaning the parks, cleaning the offices, actually doing for a public assistance check, which worked out to less than minimum wage, jobs that in New York City used to go to union workers, right? So there was also a bit of union busting involved in this. So at the time, you know, those of us in the field saw this as a real profound injustice. And so what did we do? Well, one, you know, there were many welfare recipients themselves who had really internalized a lot of, you know, the most racist, pernicious rhetoric about themselves. You're lazy, you know, you're living high on the hog on your. So
Right.
what we started to do in our literacy classes is actually build reading, writing, and math skills by looking at welfare and welfare reform, right? So we would have sheets that laid out myths and facts about welfare, and that's what we were reading and talking about. You know, that those who believe that you actually could live high on the hog on welfare, well, we looked at what a welfare check was, and we had everybody do a budget for the week, and that's how they were learning math and realizing, wow, it doesn't add up. And then what we started to do was get our students connected to welfare rights organizations that were fighting for their ability to stay in class, right? Meanwhile, the welfare rights organizations became more aware of adult literacy education and how that was a social and economic justice issue, and all of a sudden put on their platforms, their advocacy platforms, you know, maintaining the right to adult literacy education. So it was really a way of using an issue that was directly relevant to the lived lives of our students as a basis of curriculum instruction, consciousness raising, and connection to broader movements beyond themselves, and connecting those broader movements to adult literacy. That's really a model that's been lost in the 20 years that we've relied on public funding that just says, you know, what you are about is getting people skills to get them jobs, and anything else is beside the point, right? It's a bit of an overstatement, but not much. So really, in many ways, what this literacy and justice initiative is that the LAC has launched is not a new idea, right? It's actually a return to an old idea. It's a return to saying, you know what, let's not just talk about adult literacy education as a form of workforce development. Let's not just justify ourselves in terms of return on investment in tax dollars to society, which absolutely we are part of, but let's actually talk about literacy as a human right. Let's talk about this issue as a social justice issue, and let's actually, as a field, try to connect our students to the movements that we are seeing rise up every day from their communities that are fighting for justice for their communities. And let's get those movements to see the significance of adult literacy to themselves and to the broader vision that they have. And that's really what the Literacy and Justice Initiative is about. And the rest is just the details about the specifics of how we're doing that, you know, with our colleagues in the field.
That is fantastic. And we have a handout that we will virtually provide to all of our attendees after the panel. And that also contains the Literacy and Justice Initiative core values. So everybody can, you know, take that and have a copy for themselves. Wow. Well, on that note, we are going to open the time up for the Q&A. So if anybody has a question, please use the Q&A box at the bottom of the Zoom panel. And Paul and Ira, if you guys have questions for each other, I'd love to hear them. We're here, you know, let them rip. So
yeah, I have a question for Ira. Where is your office now? Is it still in the same place downtown?
You know, it's very interesting, Paul. We've from 2014 to today, we've been in 3 different places, but since 2017, we've been back downtown, not far from where we were.
Right.
We're working out of a WeWork, which actually up until COVID was really ideal for us because we do a lot of training and coaching sessions. And so WeWork, for people who are familiar, we're actually in a building that has 9 floors of WeWork. So there's always a space that my staff can meet. You know, like so many now, we're working remotely. And we're fortunate because so many of the programs and classes are online, we are able to do our training and our coaching online. And we anticipate, you know, at least until the new year, if not through the school year, that we're going to remain working remotely. And I guess I have a question for you, Paul, which is, you know, we've known each other for a long time. I've been an admirer of yours for a long time. I always hold out hope at the softball games that you're going to magically show up, but we haven't spoken, you know, for a while. And so I am really wondering, as I ramble on about the field, about the direction of the LAC, how this does and doesn't resonate with you, how it speaks to what brought you to this in the first place in the 90s. I'm really curious.
Oof, I'm not quite sure how to answer that, Ira. You always had, ever since I've known you, and ever since we gave you that award, you've been incredible on how you can actually embrace the whole subject and talk about it and everything. No, it doesn't surprise me what you're saying. It's kind of disappointing in some ways that you're now coming back full circle to where you were all those years ago. So, but the important thing to me is there's still a huge need for it, and there's still a huge need for what you're doing. At one stage, just before I left, I mean, when I was on the board of directors for the LAC for a while, when I served on your board for a while, I was worried that the whole organization was just going to be cut off completely. And, you know, congratulations, you've done an amazing job to keep it afloat, and again, with all the people who are working with you. So if anybody's there that remembers me, please pass on my special regards, seriously.
Absolutely. Thank you for that.
This is great. Like, if we hadn't been on Zoom doing this panel, you know, Paul, you're overseas. This is just like a nice perk to the current situation that we're able to do this.
Yes, super. Yes.
It looks like we do have another question, and it's from Janet McCarthy Grimm. And it's for you, Ira. Do you work with other 501c3 organizations to expand the breadth of the LAC?
Absolutely. So thank you. That's a great question. So most of our city and state funding is to work with multi-service community-based organizations that have adult literacy programs as part of their services. So we work with over 100 programs right here in the city that are part of, you know, over 100 nonprofits. But beyond that, and I think this may be part of what you're getting at, we are, through this initiative, one of our efforts is to connect with a wide array of not-for-profits, a wide array of grassroots social and economic justice organizations, a wide array of advocacy organizations that, you know, have a relationship to the issue of adult literacy education, but are not providing adult literacy services. And so that's been a very rewarding experience for me to being able to go out and meeting organizations that I feel real fellowship and commitment to and solidarity with, but who we're not working with directly through our core services because they're not funded by the city or the state to provide adult literacy. So, and I have to say, if part of the question is that you know some not-for-profits that you think we should connect to, please connect to me and let me know, because you know, this has also been very humbling to see how many organizations there are that are out there beyond those we know. You know, we think because we know over 100 organizations, we know a lot, but the human service sector in New York City represents something like 17 to 18% of the workforce. So, you know, there are so many organizations out there that we benefit from connecting to that we probably haven't. So please let me know if you have ideas.
Cool. Steve Bedney, who's been very involved with the softball game, wanted me to point out that the award is actually hanging over your shoulder, Ira, in the background.
Yes.
Actually, it's funny that he says that, because that is not the award.
Oh.
But I realized the award is like, you know, and I run off camera and get it. And I see why Steve thinks that, because they're very, very similar. So if there is a question for Paul, I am going to run my 6 feet and get the award and hold it, because it is quite beautiful. So someone throw a question Paul's way.
Wow.
Well, this is the time where I say, don't be shy. Keep asking questions.
Listen, while I would like to say something, that all of the stuff that we did, I've got to say thank you very much to Carol Bystrom, to Steve Bedney, to Michael Weinstein, Greg Fagan. All those people were absolutely 100% behind everything we did. And I want to thank them all, and we're all dear friends still. So one day I'll see you down in Venezuela, or one day in New York. Whenever's the easiest, really.
We've got 2 more questions first one is a shorter question. Martha Hansen would like to know, Ira, have you yourself played softball in any of the games? I believe the answer is yes, but do you want to talk about your softball experience?
The answer is yes, and the answer is poorly. And I've only become a poorer softball player over time. And if anyone knew what my level of skill was to begin with, you'd be astonished that it could get any worse. But everyone is very generous to me every year. A big shout out to all the players who are here, and a big thank you. And they've dignified me the last couple of years by letting me play catcher, which I still miss every other ball that comes my way, but I have more of a fighting shot than if I was in the field. So yes, and I enjoy it, and forgive me if I've been on your team and have brought you down.
You know what they say, practice makes perfect, and it's all fun and games until somebody throws the bat. I mean, that's what I say anyway.
Exactly.
We actually have a more serious question coming up next, and I'll read the question. Do you feel that there is a good level of representation, and this is for Ira, a good level of representation of people of color in literacy advocacy? When immigrant families see other people who look like them excelling at literacy, I feel like it would reaffirm that literacy is something that they can very definitely obtain in their life, and all the better if there are people who look like them also advocating for literacy. I'll let you answer that.
So I cannot thank Irene enough for this question, and it's such an important question for us to be grappling with. What I will say is that I've seen a real transformation over the 30-ish years that I have been involved. You know, I came to this field in my early 20s. I'm now in my early 50s, and many of my mentors and many of the leaders in the field themselves were white progressive baby boomers who had come out of racial, social, and economic justice movements, but they were people who were working in solidarity with those movements. They were not from the communities themselves. And I think one of the really heartening things over the last 30 years is to see that transformation, to see that as people have retired over time, more people representing and living in the communities that these programs are serving, immigrants themselves who learned English and then went on to teach English and then became the managers and directors of ESOL programs. We've seen more and more examples. And I think if you looked around the table of advocates and program leaders today, compared to the picture you would have seen 30 years ago, you would see a dramatic difference. What I will say is that this raises a much bigger issue that those of us in the nonprofit world are grappling with, which is the question of white leadership of organizations that are within or serve communities of color. And I think that, you know, some of us have been grappling with those issues, some of the contradictions there, some of the inherently problematic issues there, and even more so during this time. And I think this is a real conversation, not just in adult literacy, but in the human service sector, social service sector in New York generally. Who should lead, right? And is it time for those of us who are white to step down? Is it no longer appropriate to have somebody who isn't an immigrant running a program or an organization for immigrants? And I think that these are really important conversations. And quite frankly, I think, you know, we are starting to go in the right direction. And that direction is that the leadership should come from the people in the communities themselves, not for those of us who see ourselves as working in solidarity, but do not come from a representative.
Absolutely. I think that's happening in publishing too. We're at a reckoning point when it comes to representation and inclusion, and you know, instead of just talking the talk, walking the walk. So that was an extremely relevant question. Carol Bystrom also wants to acknowledge Greg Fagan and Dave Dickey for getting the teams tougher in more recent decades, and also our publishers who have donated such great books over the years. Every year we're out in the park giving away children's books, and it's a really great event. It looks like we don't have any more questions at the moment. Would either of you like to provide some closing remarks or anything else you want to say that you don't think was said during the panel?
I want to hold up my award.
Yes, finally, yes. There it is. Yes.
There it is.
Oh, brilliant.
That's very cool.
on an even better wall than this wall. But again, I mean, it just speaks to how meaningful this was to me, how meaningful it was to my colleagues who have received this over the years. And just, again, I end where I begin, which is gratitude to all of you for the support you've given us in this field.
If I may see the award again, I'm getting some Keith Haring vibes from the art.
Yeah.
Really wonderful.
So this.
Oh, Ira, we can't hear you too well.
So it's been different art in different years. I'm looking and this was actually art that was done by an African immigrant in a program that year, which maybe speaks to the way, art and styles and aesthetics in art often find each other, that there was a Keith Haring vibe in art that was produced by a recent African immigrant.
Yes, I remember that. Yes.
I'm gonna it looks like there is one more question for Paul, but I think it needs to be retyped or resubmitted. But Paul, did you have anything else you wanted to add?
Oh no, I'm just delighted to be here tonight, to be honest with you. I'm a little choked because it brings back a lot of great memories, memories. Hopefully more to come.
That's really nice.
Yeah.
Well, there is one last question for you.
Okay.
During your years in printing and publishing, did you ever print a book that made you venture into ecotourism? Oh, that's a cool question.
Wow, that's a great question.
Yeah.
Boy, no. No, I didn't. If I did, I'd look to see who the publisher was and try to get my book going down that route. No, I don't think so. No, it was more of just being. How do I say it? It's things happen for a reason. I just happened to be. I visited. I went to Caracas just very quickly, and then the first night there was a gunfight outside the hotel. I thought, oh, this is not good. And so me and my friend and I, the next day we went to the jungle, and within the following day we were sitting with some indigenous folks in their lodge, just having killed a jaguar and pelted it, and I don't know what we're eating. Maybe we're eating the jaguar or something. And it's right in the middle of the jungle, far away from New York City, and that's really what got me involved. And the place was just magical, and the people were incredible. And that's, one of their indigenous tribes I've been working with now, called the Paimon, really caught my attention. And over the 20 years, I haven't stopped working with them. It's a bit like working literacy, but and I think literacy really gave me a great help in working with their culture and trying to how do I say, guard their culture, try to bring it back to them, the language and stuff like that. And it's all from the days that I had in New York City. So no, it wasn't a book on ecotourism. It was more of a live event. But what I learned in my time in the publishing industry and with folks at Literacy Assistance Center like Ira is I learned an awful lot, and it's helped me a lot in my life. It really has. I've enjoyed it loads.
That's great. I just want to point out, during the scope of this conversation, we've covered Nebraska, the jungle, we've talked about Venezuela, upstate New York. We've really covered all of the geographic bases, so I just found that kind of amusing.
And I realized that I've got a tan and you guys haven't. That means you must be working in an office all day long. Sorry.
It's a living, working from home. Well, I just want to thank the two of you, Paul and Ira, so much for your time. You were fantastic panelists. You made this a real joy. And I want to thank everybody who attended this event virtually. Please stay tuned for more virtual programming coming this fall from the Book Industry Guild of New York. And please, if you aren't already following us, don't forget to follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram at BigOfNY. That's at BigOfNY. Had to include my shameless plug there. And on that note, oh, and there is somebody asking to please send the bungee jump photos after the I think
I'll do that.
Okay.
Make sure somebody follows up with me in an email or something, and I'll look it up and find the best way to get them over.
All right.
They're priceless, absolutely priceless.
We're definitely going to make that happen.
Yeah. Especially with me going out like this. Yeah.
I can't wait to see it. Thank you both again, and to everyone else, have a great night, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you very much.
Thank you all.
Love
Take
to
care.
everybody. Take care.
Bye.